What is going on, everybody out there? It's me. It's Nick from CWE, and I'm here to talk about some NASCAR DFS. We've got the biggest, longest race of the year tomorrow, the Coca-Cola 600. And let's just be honest, up to this point, the Charlotte races have all been awesome. From the truck race to the Open to the All-Star race to the ARCA race, to the Xfinity race, everything we've watched coming into this week at Charlotte Motor Speedway has been exactly what you would want out of a racing product. Like, super solid, highly competitive. For the most part, in every race, there was the potential for not the obvious result to take place. So, yeah, I'm expecting big things out of the race tomorrow. This has been a peculiar race kind of for two of the last three races where we've had like ultra dominators where, we always talk about dominators being the guys who can lead laps or get fastest laps. But, Kyle Busch led 377 laps last year. 2 years before that, Martin Truex led 393. And both of them turned in huge performances, well over 200 fantasy points. It was a situation where if you didn't play them, you just were not cashing, big money. That's it. There's no alternative. Sometimes if you get in the right situation and, you have a sub 5% guy who somehow, goes from 35th to 8th place. And typically we're just looking at that kind of stuff happening at Daytona and Talladega. You can do it, but that's highly critical if you're missing a guy who's in triple digits. I mean, it's just your hopes for tournament takedowns pretty much is not going to be there. Charlotte, mile and a half track, 400 laps, 600 miles. So we will see, 200 points. We'll see 300 points for dominators this week. That'll be 100 points for laps led. That'll be 200 points for fastest laps. Really, a lot of the time this year, the fastest laps have been coming throughout the field. I do think we have some really fast cars this week that could kind of, make that not a reality and to kind of hedge some of that into just a few cars. Typically, we're looking at, I have some stats. Cars that have finished 10 laps or more down in this race. 2018, there were 11, 2017, 12, 2016, 5, 2015, 8, 2014, 10. We are kind of looking more towards 18 and 17 because that's when stage racing came into things. So it conceivably could have even been more than that. Cars that finished off in 18, it was, let's just say in all respective years, starting in 2018 and going back, we have 5, 9, 2, 4, 6. So a lot of cars finishing a lot of laps down, but not necessarily a ton of cars finishing off the track. But if you do get caught, 8 laps down, you are probably finishing in the mid-30s, maybe early 30s. So if you started in the teens or above, you're done. Well, if you started anything above where you finished, you're going to be done in a race like this. Cautions, not counting stage ends or the end of the race, 8, 6, 3, 7, 8. So, the year that Austin Dillon won, we had 6. The year that Busch won in stage racing, we had 8. Based off of what we've seen, I can definitely see there being more cautions. I could definitely see there being more guys, 10 laps down. I think this will be a race where if you do have like a major dominator, I do think you're going to see, up to 3/4 of the field a lap down. God forbid someone gets out there and leads 380 laps. I mean, it's not inspiring to believe that we're going to see a ton of cars left on the lead lap by the time the end of the race came. I really think we only had 10 cars last year that finished on the lead lap when Kyle Busch dominated. So that's not the kind of racing we want to see. Everybody has their different kind of race they want to see. It's just like in baseball. Like, do you want to watch, Chris Sale attempt to pitch a no-hitter, or would you rather watch the Red Sox, score 15 runs and their opponent score 10 runs and just have a huge, game that's all offense? Some people want those extremes. Other people kind of want to just have something in the middle. I'm just hoping that this 2 weeks will not be capped off with something that just ends up being unwatchable, because all of the eyes are on the Monster Energy Cup Series. There's not on Xfinity. It's not on the Truck Series. Even though those were exciting races, there's very few people watching them by comparison. So I'm excited. I think we're going to see something, special this week. And I'm doing this video every week from here on out. I tried to figure out how I wanted to do this, and I was doing 2 videos, and I wanted to do a preview video that just kind of talked about the track pre-qualifying. But those videos are a waste of my time, because nothing matters until cars get qualified. William Byron qualifying first is a huge difference between William Byron qualifying 31st. So to just sit there and say car has shown speed, could be good, it's generic. I don't really want to produce content just to try to get people to listen to us, to bring up hits. I'm here doing this on behalf of the DFS HQ. You can find us online. We're just getting our website off and running at dfsheadquarters.com. Find us on Twitter at DFS Headquarters. Rest of the month of May, we're running a special $5 for a month-long subscription. So you've got about another week left to jump on that. We have guys hitting MLB, NASCAR, tennis room is hot, golf room is hot, WNBA kicked off. We had a bunch of winners. It was nice to see. $5 price probably goes up to, I think it's at $20, but you're getting every sport. You're getting full access to our Discord chat. A lot of that will be moving over to the website, but we have some very interactive coaches who spend a lot of time in the Discord. So even if most of our content does eventually, trickle onto the website, you're still going to have unparalleled access to the coaches. I personally handle NASCAR, NBA, college football, NFL. Those are the things I am way better than average at. I don't know. It sounds braggadocious, but it is what it is. I do well. So anyway, let's get started. I'm going to kind of just, look at some things here. I have a bunch of notes, and, how does this race line up? So before we get into kind of like the who, I want to look a little bit of the how. We've typically seen probably like 1 to 2 dominators in these 1.5 mile races. Totally an argument to be made that you could see as many as 3. Really, there's an argument that anything could happen, right? We could see a situation where you have 4 guys or 5 guys lead 70 laps each. Totally in the realm of possibility. I'm not going to sit here and write it off and say it can't take place. I do think we're probably looking at 1 or 2 dominators leading, 100 plus laps. One of them probably leading 200 plus laps. That's my general take on things at this point. So where will they come from? Who will they be? That's the whole point of doing this right now. How will lineup construction be? I think lineup construction for Cash Game should be vastly different than GPPs. Not last week, but the Kansas race is a perfect example where your Cash Games could almost have lined up perfectly with your tournament lineups. Had a few things gone a little bit different with some of these people failing tech and moving to the back. It really almost became a situation where you could have played Harvick with 5 guys who started, 28 plus, and you probably would have been able to put together the optimal from there. But what ended up happening was Joey Logano chose some really stupid strategy to stay out and win a stage, and that shuffled him back to the point where he was starting, in the late teens or early 20s. And it isn't a track that you could just push your way ahead. You're not just driving all the way up there. It's not as bad as Dover was the week before, but we saw Logano struggle, and it took him a long time to get to the point where he was making a comeback. So, yeah, I mean, this week, I think we're going to see something that's going to be vastly different. I think you're going to have a mentality for your cash game builds. I think you're going to say, you're going to have a different strategy for your tournaments. I have a question. This is the first time we've opened it up public, so I get sidetracked, and that's my apologies. This video is going to be free moving forward. It's not going to contain as much information as our gated content will on the Discord and the website. But Luke Altmaier, what's up? Thank you for watching. Pay for Brad or get Hamlin and Larson? It's a really good question. Hamlin has been pretty solid on 1.5 miles. I get nervous when I have to play a chalky Hamlin, and I think that's the way it's going to go. Larson, that team seems like they figured something out. Last week, I was all over Larson. I literally had like 90% of him. I never lock a guy in just because it's a sport where accidents happen, and you're going to be found with your pants around your ankles if you play someone at 100% and they lose. But Larson was basically in the best possible spot outside of Alex Bowman. And I heard him after the open races just really talking about how his car was performing really well in traffic. And through the week, I've kind of heard some people say some things like, well, it's not going to work out really well because the package doesn't really lead to, running up against the wall as much. But he's starting so far back at 26th, I believe, that I just don't think that is as much of an argument, and it's 25th. Brad has... Brad's an option every week because he and Paul Wolf will craft strategies that many other teams won't consider, won't look at. Even though the practice speeds don't look like it this week, they're still a viable option. But if you're talking about doing something like Brad and kind of like a dead range with like Almirola, Jimmy Johnson, Alex Bowman, Daniel Suarez, Austin Dillon, where those cars don't have that much upside or there's concerns about them, or maybe they're starting too far ahead like Almirola will get to, where if he doesn't lead laps, then I don't think he has the potential to pay off his price. So for me, I'm probably going to go Hamlin and Larson. The Gibbs car is also just showing a ton of speed in practice. Let's talk about practice, then we'll move on to the picks. All right, practice. So biggest thing to understand with a race like this is it's going to start 6 p.m. Eastern time, and it's going to go on probably until like 11 o'clock at night. The cars are going to go through changes. The tracks are going to go through changes. So you have to somewhat take the practice results with a grain of salt. You can't just say Hamlin was really fast, so he's going to be able to get up ahead. And, he's going to be a top 5 car within a couple of laps. He might, but what happens as the track gets warmer and then it gets cooler? There's a lot of things that happen. So I'm not going to put a ton of equity into practice times, but I am looking at it just to kind of make sure things add up. So first and foremost, for my builds, I'm basically taking everyone below Parker Kligerman, and I'm just not really that interested in playing them. For these guys to be in the winning lineups, you really need to have a lot of the top dollar guys putting up huge points. You could put Busch and Harvick into a lineup together and still build a good lineup. But then if you try to do something like Kyle Truex and maybe Larson, it gets a little bit trickier in there. So I'm kind of leaving them alone. I'm going to start with Parker Kligerman. I don't think he has the highest upside in the world. I'm going to kind of go in reverse order here just because I don't want to talk about all the studs right at the beginning and then work down to guys like Ross Chastain and Landon Castle. So Kligerman, I think, has upside. I kind of see him being a 26 to 28 car. I think he's smart enough to learn from what he did at Talladega, where he really just boneheadedly pitted when he could have stayed out on the track and ended up putting himself 3 laps down and just had a car that could have been there when we needed it to be, and it just wasn't. But I think here, looking at around 22 to 25 fantasy points at the price, I think it'll be fine. LaJoy, right on the edge of what I'm using. I may not use him at all, but they've shown speed this year. They've actually, in a lot of situations, done better than, the front row team of, Reagan, Tift, and McDowell. So I think he's a deep tournament play. I wish he was probably starting like mid-30s, but he's in the mix. For me, Matt Tift is out, qualified too high. Castle, just he's good, but not. I want guys who can break 30. That's really what it comes down to. And for Castle to break 30, he's going to need to finish in like 26th place, which isn't impossible, but has not happened very much, if at all, this year. So he's low end to maybe not at all. Ross Chastain is a guy that everybody seems to have a hard on for, except he never really comes through, except at Daytona to begin the year. Like, he'll be there. He probably will finish like 30th, but it's not going to be enough. I really don't think so. So I'm going to have very limited exposure to everyone under Bubba Wallace. Listen, I've played more Bubba Wallace this year than I should have. And I'm not a crappy NASCAR fantasy player. I took down the Piston. I'm top 25 ranked on Roto Grinders, and I'm not max entering 150 lineups into something. I'm playing 20 entry maxes. I'm playing 20 in the $10 tournament. So there is a little bit of skill and knowledge involved in it. And I'm not trying to rag on, because you can max enter and be a stud. I'm not saying max entry doesn't make you good. It's very difficult to max enter 150 lineups and be profitable. It is, bottom line. I like when I win money to take my money out. That's just how I am. I do play with a little bit of scared money. It's definitely stunted my ability to grow as a DFS player, but it allows me to live a little more comfortably, and that's really what I'm after. So I've played a lot of Bubba Wallace, and the results have been piss poor. Really thought he was going to do something at Talladega, and he did. He wrecked a bunch of cars, including himself. He obviously came out and talked about his depression. I'll give him props for that. It's difficult to talk about that, especially as a male. We're kind of like trained to keep that stuff in, be tough. That vulnerability can be turned into something actionable. And I feel like there's not a ton of downside where he's starting. Yes, he's going to finish negative if he wrecks and he's the first car out again. That's the bottom line. But this is a guy who has shown some type of upside in the past. He's very cheap. If he can get to like 22, he's going to be a guy that could flirt with being on the optimal lineup. So I'll be overweight on Bubba, whatever that looks like. I'd have to assume he's going to be like 15%, maybe even 10%. I don't know if I'll go double, maybe go 20%. I think there's enough cheaper drivers that could see ownership that it doesn't worry me as much about taking Bubba at 20% and feeling like I could have some equity on the field. And I think that, I feel like he broke through with the open races. First and second open races, man, he was right there. He was bumping with William Byron, didn't work out, bumped with Suarez, and he got to the show and he looked good. Looked like a competent driver, and I'm hoping that continues for him. Daniel Hemrick, 5,900 on DraftKings. So he's starting 10th. I know we had a question on this. Hemrick and his teammate Dylan have been basically pain in the asses a lot of weeks this year because they show up to the track, they qualify high, they have speed, and then they both finish. Hemrick finishes in the early to mid-20s. Dylan finishes 11 to 14. I want to play Daniel Hemrick because I think people will look at him. They'll look at Reagan just slightly above him. DiBenedetto slightly above that. Ty Dillon a little bit above that. And then, you have your Chastain and guys that are starting in the 30s, and they could go, a little bit. I think that we're going to find a situation where Hemrick's going to be extremely low owned. And I'm a gambler, right? Like when William Byron had the pole a couple of weeks ago, I was all over William Byron because it was Dover. I think it was at Dover he had the pole. Something. William Byron started second or something. And with it being hard to pass, the logic was just as long as he can stay out of trouble and stay towards the front, they can use pit strategy. And they did to lead some laps to make it to the point where even though he fell like 5 spots back, he was still on the optimal. Can Hemrick do the same thing? Hemrick popped, I think, a top 3 at Talladega. It was at least a top 5. Hemrick definitely looked like the car to beat in the All-Star race or in the Open last week. I think the speed's there. I'm going to play him. I'm not going to fade him. I'm going to go slightly over the field on him. But again, this could be someone who's 5 or 6% owned. And I don't have I haven't really looked at what people are talking about. So I don't really have a great feel on what ownership is going to look like. But to me, Hemrick pops as the best type of potential play, right? Because if you just think about Tyler Reddick last week, just a guy who literally was at the right place, right time. The only thing that was going to save him last week from having to pit and going from a top 10 car to a mid 20 car was a caution, and he got it. So all of those people who played Tyler Reddick last week got the benefit of luck. And that happens in racing. It happens in all sports, So if something similar happens here, and the 600 is known for some crazy stuff happening. It's not just a race where you're guaranteed to have someone drive around the track for 300 laps and no one do anything behind them. There's definitely a scenario where Daniel Hemrick finishes in 8th place and has 41 fantasy points. And you just look at the guys around him and what Reagan, DiBenedetto, McDowell, Wallace would have to do to get there. And it's a much more difficult path. It's not just moving up 2 spots. For those guys, it's moving up like 12, 13, 15 spots to be able to get the same amount of points. So he definitely has a ton of risk. The likely scenario here is that he finishes like 18th, 20th, 23rd. But if he doesn't, and he can actually put together a full race, the car has speed. If he can adapt to the changes in the track and stay, even if he just stays within the top 12, I think Hemrick can be someone you can look at and play in tournaments. But as far as cash goes, you can't do it because, like I said, realistic situation is this guy's going to lose 12 spots. That's the most likely scenario is he loses 12 spots and all of the guys around him gain 5, 6, 7, potentially 15, could be what a guy like Reagan in an optimal situation could get. So speaking of Reagan, he's going to be the cash chalk this week. There's just, to me, I don't see any way around it. He's cheap enough. The car looks like it has some speed to it. He looked sporty in the Open race. Really, he did. There's just not a lot of stuff to love, right? Like I said, you can chase Kligerman, you could chase Chastain, but you need some freakish stuff to happen where there's like 10 car accidents and these guys can jump up wholesale like 10 spots right away. So I'll have a pretty good amount of Reagan. I feel like he could be a top 20 car, but this team has sucked this year. Front row has sucked. Like I said, Corey LaJoie has been better than front row racing most of the time. But starting 31st, man, that's just, I think he's finished top 25 on all of the mile and a halves this year. So as far as cash goes, I think he's the safest option. Michael McDowell, his teammate, 6,200, started 23rd. I actually think that's too close to his starting position. McDowell has not really been as good. It's
it's not as bad as it was to start the season, where outside of the 500, I think he didn't finish 3 races in a row, or he finished late 20s, early 30s. And that's definitely, again, a possibility here. The practice times weren't good. Again, we're not really trying to emphasize that overly too much, but it's not a good sign, right? Like, it's not a bad sign that a car shows a lot of speed. It's not a great sign that the car shows no speed, and he didn't show speed in either practice today. So I'm tentatively, McDowell is a fringe completely fade. Now, what will I play? I'll have 20 in the 25 cent, 20 in the dollar, 20 in the 3, 20 in the 5, 20 in the 10. So I think that's 100 lineups. He may be a guy that I put at like 5%, but I really try to get away from those guys because they end up being on the riskier lineups. So I need everything to go right in those, and it just doesn't seem to work out right for me. Matt DiBenedetto, 6,300, starting 27th. Could be chalk. I'm tentatively planning on playing both him and Reagan in cash this week. I think both of them have. I think DiBenedetto probably has better upside. I think we could see DiBenedetto, who he says they messed up in qualifying. He believes that they're an 15 to 18 car. We've seen that out of him a couple of times this week. The price is right. I'll buy in on that. I think he'll be pretty popular too. Ryan Preece, 6,500, starting 24th. He's run reasonably well over the last few weeks prior to the, All-Star race. Just not a ton of upside like we get with DiBenedetto and McDowell. And I don't see this being a situation where we see a ceiling from him. I think you're going to see your pre-ceilings at probably like road courses, the old restrictor plate tracks. I don't know what to call them now. The tapered spacer tracks. It just sounds stupid. So I'll have a little bit, but I don't think I'm going to go overboard on him this week. Ty Dillon. Ty's actually a really tough read. They had the car good by the third open race last week. They finished behind Larson. The practice times haven't looked great, but we've seen Ty primarily running as a, top 20 car, maybe 22nd. Again, probably a better cash play than a tournament play. I don't know how high his upside is. Starting 28, though, there's enough meat left on the bone that if things happen and he moves up 10 spots, that he's going to have, maybe even close to 40 fantasy points, and that changes things completely. Now you're very highly likely to see him in the optimal. So I would have some Dillon. If I'm playing 100 this week, I have to sit down and really look at things. It's going to be 15 to 20%. Paul Menard, 6,900, starting 17th. Menard, unless he's starting like past 30, is never a cash option. His results are all over the place. The benefit with Paul Menard is that he actually does have top 5 upside. You'll see it like 5 times a year, maybe 3 times a year, where he'll just out of the blue pop a top 5, and he's cheap enough that if he does that from the 17th position, you're bringing home money, because I don't think he's going to be that highly owned. You have Dillon, DiBenedetto below him, Buescher, who I really think will see a pretty fair amount of ownership this week. So again, he's one of those GPP plays you can get a little bit of an edge on the field with. He showed really good speed in practice. If they have a fast car, I mean, you can do a lot worse than Menard in tournaments. Chris Buescher, 7,100, starting 22nd. He's been a weird driver this year. Buescher's my favorite driver, so I try to take off the rose-colored glasses when talking about him. His finishes have come like 18 to 22. That's basically where he's starting. He isn't the $6,300 Buescher anymore, but if you look at the prices, no one's the same price they were when the year started. Most everyone has come up. So, Buescher's one of those fringe. you have to consider him a fringe top 10 car. I mean, he has a top 10 in Atlanta. He had a top 10, or he finished just out of it at Kansas. He's one where his practice and his qualifying speeds very rarely reflect how his car actually is. Really, the only thing you can get with him is if you can find media of him talking about how he thinks his car is set up. He's very straightforward and honest. They said at Kansas that they qualified well, but they thought they had a better car than they qualified, and he ran out and ran in the top 6 to 8 the whole race, finally settling for, like I said, I think a top 10 finish. I haven't seen anything where I could, go back and look at it and hear him say, no, the car needs a lot of work done to it. That would definitely, motivate me to lower my ownership on him. I'm not one who plays, this is my favorite driver, I'm going to play him. I could care less. I'm about the money. Okay, I'm in this for the cash. If he happens to fit the bill and help me get there, all day, 100%, I'll use him. But I'm not going to use him just because he's my favorite driver and I want to see him win, because it's very unlikely that he's going to win. All right, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., 7,200, starting 9th. Ricky's done fairly well on these 1.5-mile tracks, but man, starting 9th doesn't give you, it's unlikely that we're going to see him lead laps. So that's not a huge strike against him, because he's relatively cheap. He's 7,200. He could probably drop to 11th and be okay at this price. And he's seen races where he's done that. I'll have some ownership of him. I don't think he's going to be definitely towards the bottom tier of my ownership numbers for sure. William Byron, 7,400, starting on the pole. This kid's polarizing, man. I love William Byron. My bold predictions for the year when I started was that Chase Elliott was going to win the championship, and that's in play still. That the Final Four, well, let me get to that later. That Ty Dillon would win on a plate track. That Eric Almirola would be the best Stewart-Haas car. That one is looking the least likely at this point. And at the Final Four at the end of the year, we're going to be Almirola, Keselowski, Elliott, and William Byron. I think we're starting to get to the point here where William Byron and Chad Knaus are getting to know one another. Chad Knaus is still the best crew chief in NASCAR. I really do believe that. Byron is going to lead laps. It literally might not be immediately. He could get jumped. There's very fast cars behind him, right? There's no guarantee he's going to stay in the lead. I do think he can get to the lead. I'm kind of softly projecting him to lead 20 early laps, which doesn't sound like a lot. And in the scheme of things, it isn't. Pole position's just about the worst place to find your drivers at, because if you don't lead laps, you're just pretty much guaranteed to lose positions, and you're losing points. The thing I like about Chad Knaus is he finds a way to get his driver to the front. It might be during green flag pit stops, but he knows how to get them there. Again, if I feel like Byron's going to be, and I don't think he's going to be stupid low owned because he's not expensive. I want to have more than the field on Byron. I have, every time Logic had said outside of Daytona, because I'll never play someone starting on the front row at Daytona or Talladega. But every time he's qualified high and convention has said you have to fade this kid, right? Because he's not going to lead laps. He's going to get jumped. He's going to lose spots. They're savvy enough to put him in a position to be there at the end. So I want to have some of that. God forbid he goes out and leads 50 laps. He could drop back to 5th, and he's, as a guarantee, going to be on the winning lineup. There's nothing you can do about it. He's going to get some fastest laps. He'll get the laps led. He'll lose some points for place differential, but you're looking at a point per dollar thing, and his $7,400 price tag you could easily fit with 2 other potential dominators. So I like him. Ryan Newman, 7,600, starting 18th. there's two guys I'm just not really sure of what I want to do, and Newman's one of them. I'll have some. I don't think it'll be much, but man, this guy can top 10. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. Practice times suck, but he's a bullish bear. Like, that's a weird thing that I think I just made up on the spot, but he's stubborn. He's an asshole. He will not let you pass him. He will make your life genuinely difficult on the racetrack, but man, he can race. If the car stays decent and they catch breaks and they don't get into trouble like they did in the All-Star race, I don't see why he can't move up. And that's what we're looking at, right? We're trying to look for guys who can move up. So the upside's there. Probably not someone I'm going to lean on in cash, but the upside's there. Austin Dillon starting 4th. Man, they look good in practice, Cars coming along, but like I said, we've seen this song and dance 2 or 3 times already, where these Richard Childress racing cars are super fast, super fast, super fast, and then the race starts and we're not as fast as we thought we were. So I do have some hesitation. He's not priced at what Daniel Hemrick is, so that if he fell to 10th, it is still a possibility that we would see him in the winning lineup, or that he wouldn't kill us that bad. He's almost 8K. And again, the guys around him just set up better. But that's why he makes a solid tournament option, right? He won this race 2 years ago. Austin Dillon wins when you forget about him. And this is we forgot about Austin Dillon's situation. He is not a guy who needs to lead a ton of laps or get a ton of fastest laps to be there at the end. If Harvick and Busch dominate this race, he is still a guy that you could very easily put with them. And just because he ends up being a good point per dollar play, he's there at the end. So I feel like he will carry very low ownership. I'm tempted to just say I'm going to match it if it's like 10%. If I think it's going to be like 7, maybe I'll go to 12 and just have a little bit of a cushion over the field. I'm a gambler. What can I say? Like, I don't want to just say, no, I'm not playing Austin Dillon, because there's no way he can do it. There's multiple ways he can do it. Harvick and Busch are racing each other with 30 laps to go, and they get in an accident and they take each other out, and he plays, pit position, takes 2 new tires, gets out first, takes the lead, and nobody catches him for 30 laps. There's a scenario. I just broke it down to you. Simple as that. How likely? Probably unlikely, but anything can happen in racing. So I want to have some, but it's not going to be a ton. Again, another guy, Daniel Suarez, 8K, starting 6th. Super fast car. I've been waiting on the Suarez breakthrough like all year, and he's done well. Not cash viable at all. Very little upside in tournaments. He's just like Austin Dillon, where he basically has to win or has to get up to like 2nd and have some fastest laps to be there at the end. Tournament only, but I'll have some Suarez. Again, I think this is going to be a situation where, he's not going to see much ownership. I'm not saying like ownership plays a portion in the GPP game, right? Because if you're rostering, you'll have one race a year, honestly, where it'll just be chalk fest, and you'll have like a 55-way tie for first place and all the chalk hits. But we don't really have that too much because there's so much variance in NASCAR. Every week, someone is the fastest car, and oftentimes this year, the fastest car hasn't panned out. So weird things happen. If Suarez is able to notch a 2nd place finish, he's in it. Alex Bowman, 8,113, and he's a reason why I could see Suarez's ownership being a little lower. Here comes Bowman. 3 straight top 2 finishes, a good showing in the All-Star race. Admits my car is not fast, but I believe I have the best handling car that I saw out of everyone I've talked to. I mean, there's a far greater argument, a much greater compelling argument to playing Alex Bowman, who's running hot, who says his car handles amazingly, as a track changes. Is a strong handling race car going to be what you want over speed, because with speed comes looseness. We saw in the Xfinity race today, John Hunter Nemechek was the fastest. I really believe once Bell got taken out, Nemechek was like the fastest car on the track, but he kept hitting the wall. I mean, that's viable that could happen. So good handling race car plus, current form. I mean, Bowman has to be there. I think he'll be more popular than he should be in cash games. Again, just because people are going to look at that and say 8,100, probably going to top 5 because he's been so good lately. I think he'll have way more ownership than he should in cash games. I probably won't go there. I get it if you do, but he's definitely someone I want to take a look at in tournaments. Jimmy Johnson, 8,300, starting 15th. Here's guy number 2 that I literally just have no idea what to try to do with this week. Jimmy Johnson has been tragic for the last 2 years now. Practice time's not really good. I mean, but this guy knows how to race. Like, he hasn't shown it. We're literally sitting in a position where a 7-time champion looks like a rookie, maybe a good rookie coming in where he can pop some top 20s, but he's not really doing a great job and putting the team on his back. There's an argument to be made that he might be the worst Hendricks car right now. Again, GPP, you can't play him in cash games. I mean, he's starting 15th. Just as easily as he could finish 10th, he could finish 20th. So I'm not looking at him. Eric Almirola, 8,500, starting second. Yeah, Eric Almirola, just stop qualifying high. How can you play him? I mean, do you think he's going to win this race? Do you think he's going to lead a portion of this race? He's not priced to have to win or lead a lot in the race, but he has nowhere to go. Like, he's stymied. This isn't a situation like where if Kyle Busch was starting second, we'd be like, oh, yeah, Kyle Busch, absolutely, gotta play Kyle, because you know that there's a very good chance he's going to get out to the lead and just not look bad. But do you feel that way about Eric Almirola? I don't think you can watch at this point in 2019. He looked awful in the All-Star race. He just hasn't looked well. We've seen him in this position before, and he comes in chalky at these positions too. And he'll probably lead. He could lead 10, 15 laps. But then what? If he falls back any more than 5 or 6 spots, where I got to tell you, I feel like there's a very high probability, again, that's going to happen, it's not going to matter. I mean, he's not going to be there. He's going to be inconsequential to the outcome of fantasy contests. So I get scared fading guys completely, but I like to try to keep like a 20-player pool, or else you just have a bunch of guys out there and it really reduces the likelihood that you're going to hit on something. Because if you have 25 drivers and you're trying to make 100 combinations out of them, your positions on them, your ownership on them is going to be much lower than if you drop it down to 20, and you have to make cuts somewhere. So Eric Almirola could be a guy I end up just taking a stand on and just saying, fuck it, if he kills me, he kills me. I don't see it happening. There's nothing in the data I see that suggests that Eric Almirola is going to be the reason why I lose money this week. But I'm not sure yet. I'm going to take some time, look at what ownership is going to be. If he's going to be at like 25 or 30%, then I might take 10% just to try to save myself in case something happens. But if he's 10%, I might just not play him, period. Because then at least I'm either saving myself 10% of ownership on people that I could put elsewhere and let the 10% of the field who plays him eat it, or if he does do well, it's only 10%, and you're probably betting 5% of those lineups, or 50% of those 10% of lineups probably had some things go wrong, so they're not as viable, so you're really just fighting with 5%, and I don't think it's going to be the end of the world unless he gets out there and dominates. Eric Jones starting 16th, 8,700. Eric Jones, my dude, I think he's been the best driver on 1.5 tracks this year in terms of average finish. I think I read, or maybe it's over the last few races, but he's like finished, his average finishing position is like 7th. And Eric Jones can get himself in trouble. Let's not pretend that he's a stable driver. He's a little bit wild. He's young. He's going to put it together. He's got a win under his belt. He's driving well. He's starting 16th. I don't think people are going to play him that much because he's priced a little higher, and there's $500 difference between him and Denny Hamlin. But when you talk about winners of this race, I'm going to be honest with you. I could see Eric Jones winning this race before I see Denny Hamlin winning this race. I'm not saying that Hamlin can't do it, and quite frankly, neither one of them need to win this race to be a viable fantasy option. But Eric Jones has some speed. This Gibbs team has speed. They are the cars I want to look at this week. It's just plain and simple. So I'm going to have a lot of Eric Jones. I think he's playable in both formats. And that's going to be the first flag I really plant as we're moving up here. Second flag I'm going to plant, Kurt Busch, 8,900 starting 11th. I don't think I'm going to have much, if any, of him. He was a cute play when he couldn't qualify because he doesn't know how to draft, apparently. And he was fit, starting the races 24th. And yeah, he had a really strong run at the beginning of the year where he was hitting top 5s and things like that. But that's gone. That doesn't exist anymore. At this price, I mean, he needs to get into the top 5. And while I think it's a possibility, it's just not one I'm really that high on happening. When I look at the guys on this list, there are an alarming number of them who I can see finishing higher than him. So don't know if I'll be at complete fade of him, but I will definitely attempt to go lower than the field on him. Ryan Blaney starting 19th, 9K. This has been a really crappy track for Blaney. I don't play the crappy track narrative because all it takes is one time, and you're going to feel like an asshole when he wins a race, and you didn't play him because he's not good at this track. He's been borderline Larson, right? His year has been kind of tragic if you really stop and look at it. Starting 19th, I think this car has the potential to pay its price tag off. I think this could be a top 10 car. Blaney is the kind of driver who pretty much week in and week out could put himself in position to win the race. I wouldn't rule that out. I mean, Blaney could lead laps. He could work himself up just like Denny Hamlin at 9,200, starting 20th. These guys can get to the front, and they could lead laps. It's in the realm of possibility, starting as far back as they are, that they could still do it. So I want to try to get ownership of these guys. And it's going to come at the expense of someone like a Clint Bowyer at 9,400 starting 8th. Like, we've talked about it multiple times thus far in this video. A guy like Bowyer is probably going to go overlooked because, let's face it, you've got guys all around him starting way further back or look like they have a higher probability of getting to the front and leading laps. So Bowyer's going to be lost in the shuffle. Bowyer's priced kind of high, 9,400. He's going to have to finish runner-up in this race or get a bunch of fastest laps or a bunch of laps led to really, really pay off. Whereas if Larson, Hamlin, Blaney, Keselowski can top 5 it, they've done it without having to lead laps. I don't think Clint Bowyer being there at the end in a meaningful position is going to be a very likely result. So I'm going to be very, very, very low ownership of him. But the argument for playing him in a GPP is there because at the end of the day, if everyone takes that stand and says other people are better, there's equity in playing him because if everyone, Larson could wreck, we've seen it. Keselowski could wreck, we've seen it. Blaney can blow up, we've seen it. Hamlin can get 419 fucking pit road penalties. We've seen it again and again and again. And what happens then? You know, if the right combination ends up being 2 guys priced at, 9,500 and above and 3 guys under 7K, and the perfect fill-in is Clint Boyer. Like, that's all it takes. And Boyer pops off a 45-point average day, and he's there. So you can't rule him completely out, but I'd rather spend for guys like Larson, 9,600, starting 25th. I firmly believe they have something figured out. I do think that he's going to be competitive. He's probably someone we can look at in cash games. I really think so. But I think that there's still that risk where you're like, okay, it's been a couple races, but I want to see a little more. Joey Logano, 9,900, starting 7th. He kind of fits in the Clint Boyer mold with me, where I'm just like, I think he's going to get passed, or I don't think he's going to really move up that much. And at his price, I can't have that. You can't have Joey Logano in this situation where he's not leading laps. So he's going to be someone I take a very, very low ownership stand on. Again, though, if you can, if he's going to be 5% owned, I'll take a very low ownership on him, and it'll be 10%, because I'm fine with losing 10% of my lineups, but I'm also fine having double the field on him. I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm not going any higher than that on him at this time, I don't think. Brad Keselowski, 10-1, starting 21st. Place differential upside is there. We know he and Paul Wolf will get creative if it comes down to it. We've seen him win races before. He needs to dominate. I really, really, really still believe that, because if it goes 1, 2, 3, Busch, Harvick, and Keselowski, and all the shit cars crap out and finish with single-digit points, it's going to be whoever leads the most laps, and not Brad Keselowski just because he got up to 5th place. So I do think that even at his, place differential upside, his price dictates that he needs to lead laps. Same thing goes for Chase Elliott, 10-3, starting 12th. Chase is a great tournament option this week. He's been running well. And this is a week, despite how popular he is amongst general NASCAR fans, that people may honestly just bypass him because some other cars have better speeds, or the word is around is that they have very strong cars. And then guys underneath them have the place differential upside. So you have a perfect situation, just like we saw last week. How crazy was that? He failed tech. And even of all those guys running in the back, he was super low owned. I was like 50% on Elliott, then he was only like 27% owned, starting 28th. I mean, come on. And he ended up being the highest scoring driver in the race. Martin Truex Jr., 10-6, starting 14th. I do think Truex will see a fair bit of ownership, just because people will remember the 393. People will remember that he's good on mile and a half, even though I don't really think he has been this year. I think there are still some struggles going on with moving over to Gibbs. I don't think it's been like, wow, in your face like we've seen with some teams. Truex is still on the dominator radar. He's definitely a guy who I want to have some ownership on. He's definitely a guy I can see leading laps. So where would I put him? I'm probably going to be a little bit under the field on him. At best, even on the field. Kevin Harvick, 10-8, starting 5th. I'm going to tell you what, I honestly believe Harvick wins this race. I wrote a preview article at dfsheadquarters.com, wrote it on Tuesday or Wednesday, and my pick for the race was going to be Kevin Harvick, and I don't think anything has changed. He looked like the car to beat at the All-Star race. He looked like the car to beat in Kansas until they had the faux my tire is going down. Also, I have a tear off on my the opening of the front of my car, and I'm going to overheat. It's been a lot of bad luck in weird situations. I just think they put it together, and he's my number 2 dominator. I don't think he's going to be the highest scoring driver this week, but I do think that he is going to win the race. I think he's going to lead 100-ish laps. And I think that's going to be enough. Starting 5th, he'll get that extra couple of points for place differential. I think he's the guy this week. I think he finally takes it home, secures his place in the playoffs. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Kyle Busch in 2019, 11-2, starting 3rd. He's the talk of the garage right now. Everything that I've read content-wise by people on Twitter and what the word around the garage is that Kyle Busch has the best car. And starting at 10 laps, I believe, or no, maybe, I think maybe, he is, that's closed already. No. All right. Yeah. Starting with 10 lap consecutive averages, 10, 15, 20, Kyle Busch had the fastest car. Like, there was barely a drop off. I mean, he averaged 177 miles an hour from lap 1 to lap 20. Like, it was crazy. There was some drop off, but we're talking about like a tenth of a second from lap 1 to lap 10, and then a tenth of a second from lap 10 to lap 20. I mean, we know that Kyle Busch can run good here. He very well should have won the race in back-to-back years, running out of gas and letting Austin Dillon secure his first Cup victory in 2017, kept that from taking place. I do not think we are going to see like a 200-point driver. I really think we'll see a situation where Busch leads 175, Harvick leads 125, Byron leads 50, Keselowski leads 20 while he's in between pit cycles and stuff like that. We'll see things like that. Suarez is another guy who you could almost not bet, but their strategy tends to lean on that a lot too. So I 100% definitely think that I'm focusing a lot of my tournament builds on Kevin and Kyle. I think that that's going to be the combination at the end of the day that wins out. I could be wrong. And it's not to say that I won't have Logano, Truex, Keselowski, and there's going to be a multitude of guys, but I'm really trying to stick 1 to 2 dominators. I don't really want to punt super hard because this isn't a race. It's not only a race where you don't see a ton of cars not finish, but it's a race where a few of the cars that don't finish are also the back runners. So anytime you have to play the game of guess which one with those back runners that are going to get you 15 points, I'm sorry. I'm going to do that at Daytona. I'm going to do that at Talladega. But so that's kind of my theory. We'll be discussing this through the night into tomorrow at dfsheadquarters.com. Hit us up on Twitter at DFS Headquarters if you want access to our Slack channel, our Discord channel. $5 for a month, as long as you buy by the end of the month of May. Like I said, we got a lot of stuff going on. We've had some pretty big wins, just everything you can imagine. Soccer, esports, stuff that I don't have any interest in. People are killing it in there. So $5 is a very low amount of money to have to risk. But yeah, we do a lot of good work. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I really don't have a problem discussing strategy. I'm not going to give out projections or really not going to give out cores or anything like that. But I think what you've heard in this video, you should be able to at least marinate on. I'm never going to tell you what to play because that's not how you learn in daily fantasy by me saying play guy A. You have to there's definitely a lot of thought process that has to go into it. And I'll be honest, I'm continuously learning about it, and it's been very successful for me this year. I'm very happy about it. Hopefully I can take down one of these tournaments tomorrow. And if it's not me, I hope it's one of you. Thanks for joining me, and we will see you again next week.